Chapter 18. From behind the door to her parents' room, Grace watched Mum plunge a knife into something beside the bed. Easing the door open a little further, she realized it was only Dad's file, his work file. But as the door slowed, it let out a treacherous whine, a tattletale that spun Mum's head. Her eyes burning pits black as coal, where they fell on Grace, whose gaze shot to the knife. "You!" Mum barked. Heart racing in her ears, Grace sprinted up to her room, shutting the door. "You're just like him!" Mum thundered after her. Grace pulled her floating shelf off the wall, wedging it behind her door in the wall, barring entry. It cracked open as Mum overrode the lock, bearings crunching and grinding. It jammed. Unable to drag the sliding door back, Mum rammed into it before hammering again at the electronics panel outside, demanding Grace open up. "You're just like him! You're just like that arsehole!" she screamed. "Running away, refusing to talk, son of a bitch! Open up, I said!" The door buckled where she rammed it again. "Well, you tell him. It would have been him if he were here." Grace slumped down on the other side of the cupboard, heart far outpacing the hammering her door had taken. "Open up, selfish son of a bitch! Damn it!" Sliding on some old-fashioned headphones, Grace curled up on the floor, eyes squeezing shut as the sound of Mum began to fade to the overlay of music that pulled her from her room to a place no one could reach her. Except 87, it seemed. She saw him almost instantly. Usually he was a welcome distraction, but right now it felt to her as though her very world was caving in. As though 87 himself were a sign of just how bad things had got. The ability to conjure up invisible friends like a rabbit from a hat and to exist almost entirely in a place that did not. Friend? 87 correct. Plural. His eyes darkened with a wry smile. And no one conjures me. Besides, collate me to a rabbit again, and you won't have an invisible friend to worry about. Grace hadn't expected to laugh, but his indignation lit an evanescent one that bubbled out of her nose, one she wiped back with her sleeve. "Ironic they called you Grace, isn't it?" He continued as though helpful. "You are many things," he mused, jaw firming. "Skinny, annoying, slow on the uptake. A mess, really. But relax, you're not mad." "Says my invisible friend," Grace sobbed, wiping away tears. "You overestimate yourself if you think you could invent me." 87 sobered as a realization struck. If she were the source code, there might actually be some truth to it. Shaking that little complication from mind, he drawled on. "I'm in your head, not part of you. You might be special." He eyed her with surprising warmth. "But you're not that special." He watched something sparkle up from the depths of emerald pools close to thanks, before those long lashes shuddered. "She hates me. The one person biologically programmed to love me and—" Her lips pressed firm, swallowing the logical conclusion that followed. "The green-eyed monster." 87 gave a thoughtful nod, but Grace shook her head. "She has everything." People dress up as the emperor with no clothes on and parade all flavors of insecure, born from a lack of connection to fundamentals. The hardwiring your mum developed to judge others is the only one she has to judge herself. 87 watched as years of carefully constructed assumption, this sandcastle of opinions, washed out of Grace. She can't enjoy the oasis because its beauty appears a threat, a judge. So bit by bit she destroys it, and with that, the place on which she depends. People like that reliably create the hell they one day wake in. One filled with nothing of substance. 87's expression sobered. People have been encouraged to substitute connection for consumption, truth for pride, and the real for the artificial. But everyone feels its pull toward the natural, the truth, and the beautiful, his voice laced with frustration, gaze washing over her. For a moment, Grace thought she felt an unusual air of vulnerability about him, but he convinced her otherwise as he moved along with a shrug. Those on high-class drugs find themselves able to reconnect to it, through Mobius, to gaze through the curtain and experience a fraction of its effect as the drug alters neuropathways, allowing drips of energy and euphoria from Mobius to leak through. Many get lost in it, unable or unwilling to come back. 87's mouth pressed firm as he felt her own longing to return there, to escape her unhappy situation in Mobius. "Come," he gestured for her to follow, knowing just where to take her. "You'll like this." Scooping up her hand when she failed to move, he strode through another door in Mobius. It opened as though an eye, overlooking 13th century Italy. From where they stood at the back of a gondola, bobbing about, salt water matted his hair. Sweeping it back, 87 watched Grace rise out of her little pity party on the spirit of adventure and intrigue. They wove through what appeared a floating city with meandering river roads, spiced with salt and other exotic spices from around the world. Wooden bridges arched overhead, commanding they bow every so often, unless they wish to be thrown into the water. Palaces with towering spires and narrow alleys decorate side streets, which echoed with vibrant personalities. But Grace's attention was fixed on the passenger in front as the walls of his 13th century home drew close. Grabbing his physician's bag, the man jumped out, hurrying along the jetty and up steep steps to scoop up a little girl who came to greet him. Young Christine de Pizan, 87 explained, hopping out the boat and offering Grace a hand. Though they were there and the boat responded to the move, as in Greece, no one appeared able to see them. It was a wonder, Grace marveled, still getting used to the feel of it. We're in Venice? With a nod, 87 strode after the man. The city, like the man, a rising power out of humble beginnings, mud and water, among cutthroats and beauty. It was obvious to see the man's daughter was the apple of his eye. Her mother died. Christine was just 4 years old and her father in the process of moving them to Paris, having just received confirmation of his appointment as the king's astrologer. They watched as civil unrest rose and swirled up around the state of Venice before their move to Paris. The girl's years passed in moments as she grew up in France's royal court, raised among the very accomplished. Notice anything? Grace glanced about the opulent court of Charles V. 87 was clearly looking for something profound. They're wearing pajamas. She smiled, much to his annoyance. She doesn't fit in. His mouth thinned as he skirted her over the tops of crowds to focus on Christine and through the flickering pages of late 13th century history in Mobius. They flew through decorative, immersive stills as though Orson Welles and Grace saw France, its wealthy populace in Western Europe, now under great strain, decades into their 100-year war with England. Edward III, having stake claim to the French throne, and while defending France in battle, their King John II had been taken hostage. As a result, France had lost around a third of its land in the treaty that followed. Christine's father, France's newly appointed court astrologer, began advising the king's son, Charles V, right away on matters such as negotiations with the English and how best to proceed, turning the tide. Charles soon declared war, and by the time Christine was 14, her father had helped France to recover most of their land that had been taken in the Treaty of Bretigny. Grace watched this young teenager, in a culture her father battled to rescue, surrounded by the greatest minds of her time, and their chatter in France's royal court. Women are the gateway to hell, Tertullian chortled, quickly followed by another. Seducers, playthings, not to be taken seriously, not in any real sense, Gerard de Moon agreed. Christine watched and listened with interest. It didn't take her long to realize that most minds were not great or well kept, even in this royal court. Far from it. All too often she found them neglected, or worse, left entirely abandoned. Most stately minds, while able to parrot a few lively mottos, were never able to extrapolate or apply them. And though these mottos were able to give the impression that the lights were on and somebody home, the speaker's behavior revealed a miserable state of affairs inside. She was careful to follow ideas to their logical conclusion and weigh truth with bias. Thoughts, words, and this mixing of worlds at court began to knit a colorful tapestry in her mind. Opinions, fact and fiction, all tumbled about, refining and polishing her perspective. Her father loved and encouraged her, teaching her much, from astrology to medicine and politic. They exchanged many letters over the years, in a language derived from cryptography, riddles and puzzles he'd used to keep her entertained while away. Christine's years passed in Grace's moments, and she saw the beautiful 15-year-old grow up to marry a fine young man, Etienne. He loved her, and the two did all they could to bring out the best in one another. He encouraged Christine to write daily, refining her thought on matters of interest, and in her diary, in this hidden dialect refined by her and her father, she began to do just that, filling it with notes, beginning with herbal health. She noted how women were like medicinal roots of a plant. They played a vital role for those they fed and nourished, often unseen but crucial to life, growth, stability, and the healthy development of society. She wrote another section on astrology, wisdom her father passed on, in her own insights. The second half, inspired by the frustration of ill-informed prejudice, she continued to experience at court from those claiming to represent the brightest minds of Europe. Using reason, rectitude, and the notion of justice, she began to dispel myths and misogyny in a language they'd understand, in legal terms they valued. There, she ironed out her early thinking on matters of importance, sketching women in Roman baths, making business connections and decisions. But as her father became sick, she returned to researching and noting down pharmacological treatments to help him. Grace watched Christine's heartbreak as he later died, and within a year, so too had her husband, from plague.